welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here with the author of a really cool book, which pulls on a lot of the things that I like, urban legends and nostalgia and people solving said urban legends during a nostalgic time period for myself. This one is something I'd heard about a few years back. So, of course, when this book came across my desk, I was like, must read this book and talk to the author. Collin Armstrong, please introduce yourself, who you are, and tell us about, is it Polybius?
But POLYBIUS, yeah.
POLYBIUS.
Yeah.
Tell us about POLYBIUS and where the idea for this particular version of this story came from for you.
Sure. Well, I said my name's Collin Armstrong. I'm a first-time author, but I've been writing professionally for over 10 years now in a combination of film, television, and branded content, which is a fancy way of saying like long-form advertising. Which actually there's a lot of interesting storytelling opportunities in, but that's neither here nor there. You know, I have always been a fan of horror and science fiction, suspense. I've always been kind of fascinated by urban legends and conspiracy theories because I feel like they're told with an earnestness by people that believe in them that is impossible to achieve almost as a writer. You as much as you want for people to believe that your characters are invested in something going on that is, patently unreal, it's unreal. It's hard to instill that level of, kind of belief in a character, but there are people out there that'll swear up and down, yeah, I was in an arcade in the 80s and I saw this kid collapse and there were, men in black coming in and plugging in hard drives and downloading data and everything else. So that sort of, the world of urban legends and conspiracy theories has always fascinated me. When I found out about Polybius, it was the late 2000s, and it was just a moment in life where I had a group of close friends, and we were all just, always sharing whatever strange. It was the good days of the internet, and we were always just sharing whatever strange stuff we could find. And I remember when that popped up, we were all really interested in it because we were all gamers. We all loved this sort of, dark 80s lore that is, there at the center of the story. So I knew right away there was a story there. And I had for, a while, had been wanting to figure out an avenue to do like a kind of a dark coming of age story. I grew up on, Carrie and John Saul's Creature and Stand By Me and River's Edge and those types of things. And I saw right away how this could accommodate that, just the very basics of the legend. You've got an arcade, you've got, kind of this mysterious game shows up. It causes problems with people kind of psychologically. It incites violence. Okay, this is a great arena. It took a very long time to figure out the right way to get into it. I tried to adapt it first as a feature film pitch. I tried to work on it as a manuscript. I was going to do it as like an online epistolary, like a fake blog where I was posing as some sort of survivor of whatever had happened. And it was just kind of the right moment in time where I had, because of COVID, I had lost a job and that seemed like it was going to be a good job. And I was home and watching my kids during the day and at night, just kind of sitting around, having like a existential crisis about what was going to happen and were we ever going to go back to work. And I started to sort of realize like a lot of the things that over the years I had thought about how the game, sort of works, how it kind of infects people's minds, how there's this screen that is suddenly causing you to look at your neighbor differently than you had before, how you can't necessarily tell that someone is quote unquote infected just by looking at them. There were all these parallels to what was going on right outside. And I started working at night on the book. Pieces just started kind of falling into place. I got about halfway through it and wound up going back to work on a job in television. And, I think maybe a year later, picked it up again just out of curiosity. I was like, that's not bad. So I started sharing it with a few people and got, positive reactions from my agent and my managers. And they're normally very like, I don't know. And they were all so positive. I was like, oh, maybe this is, like this is that's a sign. And so I finished the book in late 2022. It sold early 2023. It was edited in 24, and now it's here in 2025. It's about to come out. It's a very long, strange journey, but that's it in the smallest nutshell I think I could probably put it.
Yeah, and I think, when I first heard about this, I'm trying to remember now, I'm trying to remember when I first heard about this urban legend, but some research shows that it first showed up online about 1998, at least the
Yeah.
internet as we saw it. But just doing research about it, and then we can kind of dive into the characters a little bit and just sort of the way that the threads come together. I looked at this and I was like, okay, so we first started hearing about this on the internet around 1998, but being that this is an 80s urban legend and it takes place and, supposedly came about around the time of arcades and gaming and all sorts of other things. What a sweet spot between paranoia about video games and what video games were doing to people, like they're replacing everything and they're bad. And then that with just paranoia about the government and conspiracies, it seems like it was a really perfect brew for this type of urban legend. And now that we are having sort of this renaissance of nostalgia for old video games and old arcades, this seems like a really perfect time to be reading a book like this. So what I thought, was interesting was, first of all, the pacing of the book is really, really good. It's very cinematic in the way that it's written. We can definitely tell, or at least I could definitely tell that you have a cinematic background. You
For
start
better, for better or worse, probably. So, yeah.
well, you start off with something with a hook, some sort of hook, and then you dive into the characters, which was really well done. Uh, for something that took such a long journey, so did the characters themselves show up later after the story and begin to tie things together for you? Like, was Andy first? Was Ro first? Was Mal first?
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely was a situation where, again, like I had that concept and I knew that it could be the framework for the sort of story I wanted to tell, but the pieces within that story I didn't quite have a handle on. Andy definitely came first. She and I have a lot in common. I think, and that's probably not untrue for a lot of first time writers in this sense. You kind of drawing on personal experience, but I had by all accounts, like a pretty okay childhood, growing up, and high school years pretty uneventful. But I never really felt at home, and I always sort of like saw myself or imagined myself someplace else. And as I've gotten older, I've realized like it's a little bit of missing the forest for the trees, but I think it's just ever thus with kids. So I felt like I had a handle on who she could be. I liked the idea of her being kind of this prototypal maker. I thought that that was an interesting mind space to put a young woman in at that point in time. Some of the things that like she might experience or might feel about herself because of the things that she likes gave her a little bit more depth. And once I had her and I just was kind of like navigating her like through the story, it kind of became a question of like, well, who else would be a part of this person's world, right? Someone who sort of is a kind of a misanthropic person and is kind of willfully sort of pushing other people away, who would maybe be able to push their way in. And so a lot of it was born out of kind of reactions to her characterization. It's funny, I've been I'm grateful and very thankful to do these questionnaires and things for websites that'll be popping up in advance of the book's release. And I was writing about Mal earlier today, and for me, he was a really interesting character because, the game is sort of the central villain, but I did feel like I needed a way to more explicitly kind of personify it, as a character. And I found that through him. And once I kind of figured out that he was this like wannabe tough guy, it became so much more interesting for me because of the way the game works. It, kind of like enabling him to become what he has always seen himself as makes him so much more dangerous. And so there's a ton of Mal on the cutting room floor, whatever you want to call it, in this milieu. I just kept writing him because I liked him so much. There was like a whole heist sequence where he robs the bank in town, and there's when kind of everybody's rioting at the end. My manager was like, "This is cool, but can't he just steal money from somebody on the street?" And I was like, "Yes." So,
Yeah, no, he was a very interesting character to read, and I do like, your sort of take on how the game works. And I think that that's one really cool thing about playing in a sandbox that has some toys set up in it, but you can play with the rules in a way that makes sense for the world that you're building. Tasker Bay is a very vivid place. Does it represent a place that you had lived?
not where I'd lived, but it's kind of a combination of a few different things. Growing up, I grew up in the Midwest, in a landlocked, little town in Indiana, which is a great place. But I moved on from there, and but as a kid, again, just being a big nerd for anything horror and sci-fi, I love films like a real specific that they had a real specific vibe and texture, like The Birds, The Fog, an old Gloria and Willard Hayek movie called Messiah of Evil, that were set in these little California towns, and I just loved the feel and the look. And so when I moved out to LA, and I've been in LA for about 15 years now, one of the places I wanted to go and have now been several times is Sonoma County, which is where it's a little north of San Francisco. It's where Bodega Bay is, which is where The Birds was shot. Point Reyes, which is where a lot of The Fog was shot. So it was really patterned after a lot of those spaces, just because I thought they're very atmospheric, kind of these little beach towns that have sort of, held on and become as, outrageously expensive as everything else in California, but still have that sort of old feel and vibe to them. And I thought that created an interesting opportunity too for the citizens of Tasker Bay to kind of find themselves in the middle of this transition into, becoming a more modern little, place where people might live, which I thought added a bit of interesting texture for the characters in the world.
And the way that the narrative plays out, it's got a few different points of view. So you have Andy, you have Ro, you have their parents, you have Mal. Uh, when you were writing it, was your process to write everything sequentially, or did you have to keep them separately to make sure that they didn't muddy each other's waters too much?
I'm a very linear person. I've always written that way. I know I had a writing partner when I was first starting out, and I've read other writers writing, and they will move around, and my brain doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. So I had to go kind of straight through. But I also am someone who does a lot of outlining. I had a 40 some page written outline. I had cards. I had everything else to kind of help me step through it. And then even when I dropped it, like I was describing, I got about halfway through and then came back to it. I just redid everything that was left because it was like, I got to get myself back into this somehow. So yeah, that's just me, that was kind of how my brain has to function. And it can cause problems because then you do get like, oh no, now like retroactively, this choice make no sense. So that's where having good people reading your stuff comes in handy because they can help you sniff all that out and figure out ways to deal with it, logically.
How did you keep yourself in the time period so well? Like it really was like I felt like I was reading like a Goonies type story.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, which in my opinion, Goonies is, and I've said this a few times, it's like it, but for kids,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like it's not exactly, but it shares the same threads. And you do have a group of ostracized teens going against some impossible choices. Although I think Pennywise is scarier than the Fratellis, but that's just me.
I mean, but what they have in common is there's sort of these exaggerated versions of problems that the kids are going to encounter as they get older.
Yeah,
And
that's true. Yep. Yep.
you're meeting them at these points in time where like change is happening. And the change is represented through sort of like, a fantastic construct or whatever, but like that's what makes it, with everything else aside, still like a human story. And I think that's what's so great about, like you mentioned Goonies, like all the Amblin stuff from that era, and I'm a child of that era. So I think for me, it was also just kind of nice. And again, like there was a period in time where I had kind of written the book off as just me coping with COVID. And I was like, oh, I was just trying to get out of here. Like my brain was just, off to 1982 or whatever. And I was small child then. I missed the golden age of the arcade by about 10 years, but, I still was able to experience it kind of when it had shifted into being something else. But yeah, I think, I had set out to, I always tell people I was trying to write like a lost mass market, 80s mass market paperback. Like you'd go into a used bookstore and find and be like, oh, what's this? And you get home and like, oh my God, this is, hopefully this is amazing. That was the vibe I wanted to capture for it. And it just was, it was a place I was happy to be. So
It definitely, I mean, and it definitely worked. And, like I was saying, I mean, it had that feeling, and it is very much coming of age for a bunch of the characters, and feeling out your world and feeling out your place in the world. But I really, like I said, it really did feel very much like a period piece, which is great because that's obviously what
mhm.
you're going for. Did
Yeah,
you keep a playlist? Did you listen to music to
yeah.
keep yourself in that time period? What were you listening to then? I have to ask.
So I am, again, like being a big film nerd. I had built out like a 14 or 15 hour playlist of like soundtrack cues from films of that era. So it was a lot of John Carpenter, a lot of Christopher Young, a lot of Tangerine Dream, just that kind of and it's popular again. So it's not like it's some obscure sound, but that early 80s kind of synth sound was in my ears constantly. And there's lots of, like, again, there's great composers doing that now too. The guys like Cliff Martinez and that I had mixed in there as well. But yeah, that was really what would help me get my head in the right place every time I'd sit down. Because you got, like, at the time, I was like stealing time at night to do it. So sometimes it was hard to, now I have been in a mode for a while where I just sit down in the morning and I'm writing. It's great, but that was not the case then. It was writing at the end of the day, and you're tired, but you have to do something. So it was very helpful in that respect.
Yeah, you need something like almost like blank. Something
Uh-huh.
that gets your mind going and your heart pumping, but it's also blank,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
I think so. Yeah, I'm also weirdly somebody who, like, man, you put the wrong song on and I'm just a wreck, like an emotional wreck, like it'll really get me. And so I have to avoid like too much of that. But that's those cues, all those soundtrack cues are great because they also, they have a lot of atmosphere and a lot of what I was hoping to achieve, in the tone and mood and just overall vibe of the book.
So my question is, after this, are you working on something else at the moment? Since you said that you write in the mornings now.
Yeah, yeah. So since the book was finished, I've finished two proposals that are out in the world now. I'd like to keep doing this. It's been such a great experience, and it's such an interesting contrast to screenwriting where I haven't probably had the success in screenwriting I'd like. I'm not here showing off an Oscar or whatever, but it's been good and I enjoy it. But it is, nine people telling you nine separate things about your idea, and you're figuring out like, okay, which one of these do I have to take seriously, and how do I keep it from completely unraveling the thing I wanted to do? That was not really the case here. I was working with one person. It was very personal. and it just felt like a much more sort of like holistic and respectful, respectful experience. So I would love to keep doing it, but we'll see. Having said that, I am also revising like an action, kind of a contained action thriller for a producer and a director right now, and it's almost possible that'll come together. It's possible none of these things will come together, and it'll be something else. But my goal is to be back with another book soon. And the couple of ideas I've been exploring are in space kind of surrounding urban legends, which I think, they're reactions to things that are happening in society. Like that's sort of what urban legends are born out of. And Polybius, as you were pointing out earlier, you can kind of create, and I've had to do this, sort of create this timeline to figure out like, well, where did it probably come from and what, was it probably about? And I do think it was about our changing relationship with technology. And so I can't think of another urban legend that speaks more to what's going on with us now and the way that we don't know whether or not the things we're looking at that, we've enabled by surrendering information are trying to harm us or not. It's really telling, and it really speaks to the moment. And so I think that there's actually a lot that we can learn about ourselves while also having a lot of scary stuff happen, and being pulled through a book, turning pages. Like that's what I want to do, is to create something that gives you that thrill, but hopefully also there's a layer to it if you want, that you can look a little bit deeper and think a little bit more. And so that's where these other ideas are, and we'll see.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to reading more from you. Polybius comes out the last Tuesday in April. So by the time this episode airs, you would be 2 days late to get to the shelves and read it, because we air on Thursdays, or 3 days. It depends.
Better late than never.
Late than never. Pick it up. Really, it's good. If you have not heard of this urban legend, you should read this book and go down a rabbit hole afterwards, because it is super, super interesting. And Collin Armstrong, we look forward to reading more of your stuff.
Thank you. And this, by the way, is awesome. I love that you all are doing this as a public library. Like, now that I'm a parent, that my kids, they want to go to the library. It's great, like, that we've instilled that in them. And I want more people to do that. And I want, more opportunities for people to know the library's out there and doing things that are exciting and different. And it's just super cool. So I'm more than happy to be here. This is great.
Thank you so much. We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.